Communication between smells and people's brains, as weird as that may seem. Hormones in the Brain, Chapter 5. Animals use several types of chemical signals in the body to communicate or deliver information. There's the neurocrine system, that's synaptic communication. Neuro meaning nerve. Autocrine communication is communication where the hormone activates a releasing gland. Paracrine is a hormone targeting a nearby cell, and we'll see that when we look at the pancreas. The endocrine system, where the hormone passing through the blood to a distant target, and we see that all the time with the hypothalamus and the pituitary um, communicating with other organs in the body. And then the pheromone system, communication between individuals. Neurocrine communication is synaptic communication. This communication is highly localized, of course. That's how a neuron communicates with whatever it is connected to. An autocrine cell, the secreted hormone is released by the cell and then finds receptors on their own cell to attach to. Paracrine cells release a chemical communicator that affects a nearby target cell. The strongest impacts are to nearby cells. Paracrine. Endocrine communication is through the release of a hormone into the bloodstream. The blood takes a hormonal signal to distant targeted organs, where the hormone changes the function of the targeted organ. Hormones released into the environment are carried from the originator to another individual of the same species. Human females may release pheromones that regulate their menstrual cycles. This is real controversial. People don't like to think of humans as animals, but the reality is, of course, that this is not that uncommon. Let me tell you a quick story. My dog this morning, he didn't see, there was another dog in our yard. Our yard is 4 acres. It's almost 5 acres. That's pretty big. And there are trees all around our property. And another dog was in the yard. And he didn't see him. I saw him, but he didn't see him. I'm taller than he is, which is rare. I'm not usually taller than a lot of things, but I'm taller than my dog. Anyway, I saw the other dog and he didn't. And when we were walking out in the western portion of our property, where the dog had been and had urinated on some of the plants and trees in the area, my dog just went crazy because he by that time, the other dog was gone, of course, but my male dog decided that he had to remark all the places that the other dog had marked, and he's running all around the yard. He's a yellow lab, so a yellow lab Shar mix. So he that I got in Saley, he was moving a little faster than he normally did, trying to find all the spots. As far as humans are concerned, human females do seem to regulate their menstrual cycles with one another. Is this hormonal, or is this pheromonal? That is the basic question. Do males and females communicate with each other through odors? Is that why we have the distinctive odors that we do? This is fairly controversial. People don't, like I said, people don't like to think of humans as animals, similar to dogs and cats and cows and buffalo and wolves and whatnot. But the reality may be that we communicate through pheromones just like other animals do. Allomones are chemical signals that are released by one species and affect members of another species. Flowers will release allomones to attract insects that will carry their pollen to another plant of their species. And that's the hope anyway, that that will carry pollen from one flower to the next. Hormones frequently act in a gradual fashion. Behavioral and physical responses occur only after weeks of treatment and may last for several days. When hormones do alter behavior, they tend to act by changing the intensity or probability of a behavior. They do not act as a switch. The quantities and types of hormones released are influenced by environmental as well as internal factors. High levels of testosterone cause aggressive behavior. The most aggressive individual wins an encounter and maintains their testosterone level, while the loser suffers a lowering of testosterone after the encounter. Each hormone has multiple effects on different tissue, organs, and behavior. Conversely, a single type of behavior or physiological change can be affected by many different hormones. Hormones are produced in small amounts and are secreted in bursts. Pulsating patterns are sometimes crucial for the small amount of hormones to be effective. Levels of many hormones vary rhythmically throughout the day. Many hormonal systems are controlled by circadian clocks in the brain. Hormones affect and a good example of that would be cortisol. We used to draw cortisols at either exactly at 8 o'clock in the morning or exactly at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, because almost everybody is on the same circadian rhythm. Hormones affect the metabolic process in most cells and induce long-term metabolic change through the buildup and breakdown of carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. Hormones interact. The effects of one hormone can be markedly changed by the actions of another hormone. The chemical structure of a given hormone is similar in all vertebrates. The functions served across species can vary. Hormones can affect only cells that possess a receptor protein that recognizes the hormone and alters cell function. In different vertebrates, the same brain regions often possess the same hormone receptors. Neurocommunication works somewhat like an old wired telephone or telegraph system. Messages travel over fixed channels to precise destinations. The structure of the connections between neurons determines the transmission of information from one cell to another. Endocrine communication works like a television broadcasting system. Hormones are broadcast in the blood, and any number of scattered receptors throughout the body receive the message and respond to it, and that's the way television signals work. They're beamed down, and if you have the right key, then you can get that information. You can get that television program. Neural messages are very rapid and are measured in milliseconds. Hormonal messages are slow and are measured in seconds or even minutes. Most neural messages are an all or none response. Hormonal messages are analog, graded in strength by the amount of hormone released. Neural responses are very often voluntary, while hormonal responses are not. Many systems store chemical transmitters for future release. Both systems are stimulated to respond by an outside source. Both systems are quite complex and maintain many differing chemical transmitters. Some hormones used by the endocrine system are also produced by neurons and used as transmitters. Both systems use transmitters that have specific receptors on the receiving target cells that respond to the stimulation. Both systems may produce a second messenger response in the targeted cells that brings about two levels of changes at the same time. There are three categories of hormones: protein hormones, amine hormones, and steroid hormones. Protein hormones are composed of strings of amino acids. Amine hormones are composed of a single amino acid. And steroid hormones are composed of four interconnected rings of carbon atoms rather than amino acids. So we have two types of hormones that are composed of amino acids, and one that is composed of four interconnected rings of carbon. Hormones promote the proliferation, growth, and differentiation of cells. Thyroid hormones present at birth support brain development and growth. Hormones modulate cell activity. Gonadal hormones modulate the onset and maintenance of secondary sexual characteristics with puberty. Protein hormones and most amine hormones bind to receptor molecules on the surface of target cell membranes. This releases a second messenger in the cell. Because the rapid process of protein binding, protein and amine hormones tend to act rapidly. Steroid hormones must pass through the cell membrane and bind to specific receptor proteins inside the cell. The combined steroid receptor complex then binds to the DNA inside the nucleus. The effect of gene expression may increase the production of some proteins and decrease others. And now we are going to maybe see it. There we go. Okay.
Epinephrine is one of many hormones that is water-soluble, hydrophilic, and therefore unable to cross the hydrophobic plasma membranes of its target cells. Instead, it binds to receptor proteins located in the plasma membrane and does not enter the cell. When epinephrine binds to beta-adrenergic receptors on the liver cell, G proteins on the inner side of the cell membrane are activated. Each G protein is composed of 3 subunits, and the binding of epinephrine to its receptor protein causes one of the G protein subunits to dissociate from the other 2. The G protein subunit which dissociates from the others carries a GDP, which is replaced by GTP when the subunit is activated. The activated G protein subunit then diffuses within the plasma membrane until it encounters adenylyl cyclase, a membrane enzyme that is inactive until it interacts with the G protein subunit. When activated by the G protein subunit, adenylyl cyclase catalyzes the formation of cAMP from ATP. The cAMP formed at the inner surface of the membrane diffuses within the cytoplasm, where it binds to and activates protein kinase A, an enzyme that adds phosphate groups to specific cellular proteins. In liver cells, protein kinase A phosphorylates and thereby activates another enzyme called phosphorylase, which converts glycogen into glucose 6-phosphate. The glucose 6-phosphate is then converted to glucose. Through this multi-step mechanism, epinephrine causes the liver to secrete glucose into the blood during the fight or flight reaction.
So you can see why, must be watching SNL. So you can see why second messenger systems are so slow. That was the point. Most of the hormonal systems in the endocrine system control themselves through a negative feedback system. The gland detects a need to produce the hormone is produced, the need is taken care of, the gland is no longer stimulated by the need, the gland produces only enough hormone to take care of the level of the need. Insulin's negative feedback loop, glucose from a meal enters the bloodstream. The increased glucose triggers the pancreas to produce more insulin. The insulin enables the cells of the body to utilize the glucose for energy. As the level of glucose in the blood decreases, the pancreas is stimulated to produce less and less insulin. A balance is maintained. The pituitary gland rests in a depression of the skull directly behind the nasal cavity. The pituitary gland consists of 2 parts, the anterior pituitary, constructed of glandular tissue, and the posterior pituitary, constructed of neural tissue. The pituitary gland is connected to the hypothalamus by a thin piece of tissue called the pituitary stalk. The axons of the hypothalamus reach into the pituitary gland, but only in the posterior pituitary. The axons from the supraoptic nucleus and the paraventricular nucleus of the hypothalamus stimulate the posterior pituitary gland to secrete oxytocin and arginine vasopressin. Because the vascular structure of the posterior pituitary, both oxytocin and vasopressin are rapidly released into the bloodstream. Vasopressin is also known as antidiuretic hormone. This hormone helps conserve water by inhibiting the formation of urine in the kidneys. It is stimulated by areas in the supraoptic and paraventricular nucleuses that detect thirst and water needs. Oxytocin also is produced by the posterior pituitary. Oxytocin stimulates the contraction of the uterine wall that speeds up childbirth. Oxytocin also triggers the contraction of the cells in the mammary glands that allows the milk to be released from the breast. Because the process takes 30 to 60 seconds, the experienced mother will begin responding to her child's cries rather than the suckling. While oxytocin allows other animals to reproduce, in humans it mediates sexual arousal and affection response. The anterior pituitary is made up of glandular cells rather than neural cells, as the posterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary is controlled by releasing hormones produced in the hypothalamus and are transported to the anterior pituitary through a network of capillaries called the hypothalamic pituitary portal system. The neuroendocrine cells of the hypothalamus that produce the releasing hormones are controlled by two influences. They receive neural impulses from other parts of the hypothalamus that either inhibit or excite their releasing capacity. Circulating messages from other hormones directly affect them. Corticotropin-releasing hormone, CRH, from the hypothalamus stimulates the pituitary gland to release adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH, that stimulates the adrenal glands to produce corticosteroids. Thyrotropin-releasing hormone, TRH, stimulates the pituitary gland to produce thyroid-stimulating hormone that stimulates the thyroid gland to release thyroid hormones. Prolactin-releasing peptide and prolactin-inhibiting factor are produced by the hypothalamus to control the amount of prolactin released from the pituitary gland. Prolactin controls lactation in women. Somatocrinin stimulates and somatostatin inhibits are produced by the hypothalamus to stimulate the pituitary gland to produce growth hormone, which controls bone growth. Gonadotropin-releasing hormone is produced by the hypothalamus, which stimulates the pituitary gland to produce luteinizing hormone, or LH, and follicle-stimulating hormone, also known as FSH. In the female, luteinizing hormone stimulates the release of ova from the ovaries and prepares the uterine wall for implantation. Follicle-stimulating hormone stimulates secretion of estrogen and influences oviproduction. In the male, luteinizing hormone stimulates the testes to produce testosterone, and follicle-stimulating hormone influences sperm production. The adrenal glands are situated on top of each kidney. Like the pituitary gland, the adrenal glands are divided into two portions, the adrenal cortex and the adrenal medulla. The adrenal medulla releases amine hormones, epinephrine and norepinephrine, in response to the sympathetic nervous system. The adrenal cortex produces and secretes some of the steroid hormones, the adrenocorticoids. The glucocorticoids affect the metabolism of carbohydrates. Cortisol is an example of a glucocorticoid. A second group of adrenal steroids is the mineralocorticoids, which affect the ion concentration of sodium in the kidneys. Aldosterone acts on the kidneys to reduce urine output and conserve sodium, thus also conserving water. The adrenal cortex also produces sex steroids. The chief sex steroid produced by the adrenal cortex is androstenedione, and that's the steroid that Mark McGwire was using when he broke the major league home run record. It has since been broken by Barry Bonds, who was also accused of using steroids. Androstenedione contributes to adult hair growth patterns in men and women. An overabundance in a woman can lead to a more masculine hair growth pattern, like that. The adrenocortical hormones are controlled by ACTH, released from the pituitary gland. Stress is detected by the hypothalamus, and it releases CRH, corticotropin releasing hormone, to induce the pituitary to release ACTH. Unfortunately, the glucocorticoids released because of the ACTH, when released in high levels, can kill nerve cells in the hippocampus. Whoops. There goes your memory. The thyroid gland is located around the esophagus, just below the voice box. Of course, if you're a female, you can't really see or feel your voice box as readily as a male can, because theirs is much larger. Now, why in the world would a male have a larger voice box than a female does? It's so that he'll have a deeper voice. Three hormones secreted from the thyroid include the thyroxine, T4, triiodothyronine with T3, and calcitonin. The hormones are stored in the thyroid colloid. And of course, as a lab tech, I measured T3s and T4s all the time, along with TSH, trying to determine if the thyroid was malfunctioning or not. The thyroid maintains a large supply of hormones, about 100 days worth. Calcitonin promotes calcium use in the bones. T4 and T3 levels are regulated by TSH released by the anterior pituitary. T3 and T4 are amines, but act as steroids, passing through the cell membrane, finding a receptor in the cell, and then binding to the DNA. T3 and T4 are released from the thyroid gland because of the influence of TSH from the pituitary, which is induced to release TSH when stimulated by thyrotropin releasing hormone secreted by the hypothalamus. The thyroid hormones are critically dependent on iodine. An inadequate supply of iodine will lead to hypothyroidism. Since the thyroid output is inadequate, the pituitary gland produces more and more TSH to compensate, but only succeeds in enlarging the thyroid in a condition known as goiter. In the United States, this is combated with iodized salt, and that's one of the reasons why we put iodine in our salt. It's to make it more functional, I guess. Now, this is really important because if you live in the middle of the country, if you live away from seafood, then you don't really get a lot of iodine. In 1924, goiter was endemic in areas of the United States where iodine from seafood was not prevalent. In Michigan, a study in 1923 showed a 39% prevalence rate among school children. In Ohio, 31% of the school children were estimated to have goiter. In West Virginia, goiter was rare as long as local brown salt was used. When pure white salt replaced the brown, a 1922 study showed 61% of the school children had enlarged thyroid glands. And I talked to my mother. My mother was born in 1915. She went to school through the 1920s and into the 1930s, and goiter was very common where she lived because she lived in Indiana, and Indiana is right in the middle of the country. And the amount of seafood that is there and the amount of brown salt that is there is not that high. What saved the Hoosier school children was iodized salt, which Morton came out with in the 1920s. Of course, just like everything else, there were people that claimed that iodized salt was a way of controlling people, and there was mind control that was that they were trying to achieve. Anyway, eventually, people got smarter. They started using iodized salt. Everyone started using iodized salt just to make sure. And goiter pretty much went away. As a fetus is developing, if the thyroid hormones are not high enough, they will cause stunted growth, facial malformations, and reduction in brain size. The baby will also suffer from intellectual disabilities in a condition known as cretinism. And that's what they look like. They have a difficult time closing their mouth, and their tongue is oversized. I don't have. Wait a second. I need an arrow. There you go. There you go. Their tongue is oversized. The male gonads are two testes located in a sac beneath the penis. Each testis produces millions of sperm a day through Sertoli cells. In and among the Sertoli cells are Leydig cells, which secrete testosterone. Testosterone and other androgens are regulated by luteinizing hormone from the pituitary gland. Luteinizing hormone is controlled by the release of gonadotropin-releasing hormone from the hypothalamus. The female gonads are the ovaries. They're located above the vagina and at the very bottom of the abdominal cavity. There are two ovaries, one on each side of the uterus. The ovaries produce progestins and estrogens. The most important estrogen is estradiol. The primary progestin is progesterone. Estrogens trigger the production of progestin receptors in the brain, hence with puberty, progestin sensitivity ushers in the menstrual cycle after estrogen is secreted from the ovaries. All three sex hormones, androgens, estrogens, and progestins, have a similar chemical structure, 4 interconnected carbon rings. The sex hormones, along with the adrenal steroids, are derived from cholesterol. Estrogens are synthesized from androgens, and androgens are synthesized from progestins. Both males and females have the same sex hormones, only in different proportions. Unlike most brain structures, which are paired, there is only one pineal gland. It lays on the top of the brain stem. The pineal gland produces the amine hormone melatonin. Melatonin receptors are metabotropic, thus they activate G proteins, and they are slow. Since melatonin activates metabotropic receptors, reaction to it is slow. Melatonin regulates the circadian rhythm and the reaction to light and dark. Melatonin can be used to move the sleep cycle up in the night, but because it has a metabotropic receptor, it only works over time. The pancreas serves two main functions. It produces digestive enzymes, and as an endocrine gland, it secretes insulin and glucagon. The endocrine gland portion of the pancreas is a series of specialized cells called islets of Langerhans. Both glucagon and insulin affect glucose utilization by the body's cells. The peptide hormone insulin is produced in beta cells within the islets of Langerhans, while glucagon is produced in alpha cells of the islets. When glucose rises to a select point, insulin is released into the bloodstream. The insulin induces the cells to use more glucose and reduces the amount of glucose being released by the liver, lowering the blood sugar level. Glucagon serves the opposite purpose of insulin. When the pancreas detects a low blood sugar level, glucagon is released and it induces the liver to release glycogen. There is a paracrine action between alpha and beta cells of the islets of Langerhans. And that is the end of the chapter. So, next week we'll talk about something else.